Ma'am, this cabin isn't for people like you. The sentence sliced through the quiet hum of the aircraft so cleanly that even the rustle of newspapers seemed to stop. A few passengers lifted their eyes over the tops of polished leather seats, curiosity spreading faster than whispers ever could. First class had always been a place where voices stayed soft. Champagne glasses barely touched the crystal trays, and expensive watches glittered beneath warm cabin lights. Yet in that single moment, the atmosphere shifted. Comfort gave way to tension. At seat 2A sat Evelyn Brooks, a 74-year-old black woman whose silver curls framed a weathered face marked not by luxury, but by years of quiet endurance. She wore a neatly pressed navy cardigan over a simple floral dress that had clearly been mended more than once. Her black handbag rested carefully on her lap, its leather softened by decades of faithful use. There were no designer labels, no sparkling jewelry, no symbols that announced wealth to strangers trained to recognize status before humanity. She simply looked like someone's grandmother traveling alone. Ashley Collins paused beside the aisle, tablet in one hand, her immaculate uniform perfectly tailored, every strand of blonde hair secured beneath her elegant bun. She glanced at Evelyn's boarding pass for less than a second before allowing her eyes to drift across the older woman's modest clothing. Something hardened behind her practiced smile. "I'm sorry," Ashley said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "There must have been a mistake. Economy boarding is through the rear cabin." Evelyn looked up slowly. Her eyes remained calm, almost impossibly gentle, as though she had heard similar assumptions too many times to count. "I believe my ticket says seat 2A, she replied softly, offering the boarding pass with steady hands. Ashley barely looked at it. "Ma'am, I'll need you to gather your things." Across the aisle, a businessman quietly removed one earbud. A young couple exchanged uncertain glances. No one spoke. The silence itself became another witness. Evelyn lowered the ticket into her lap instead of arguing. "Would you mind checking it again?" she asked, her voice carrying neither anger nor embarrassment. It was simply a request. Ashley inhaled through her nose, already feeling the impatient eyes of boarding passengers lining the jet bridge behind her. Delays affected departure times. Departure times affected performance reviews. Performance reviews affected promotions. She had worked too hard to let confusion over an elderly passenger become another note in her record. "I already checked," Ashley answered. "First-class passengers don't usually." She stopped herself, but not before the unfinished sentence settled heavily over the cabin. "They don't usually look like you." She didn't have to finish it. Everyone heard it anyway. Evelyn's fingers gently traced the edge of her boarding pass. Outside the oval window, the evening sun painted the airport in warm shades of amber and gold. Baggage carts rolled beneath the wings. Ground crews moved with practiced rhythm. Life continued as though nothing inside the aircraft had changed. But something had. Ashley pressed the call button. Within seconds, another crew member approached. "Could you contact gate security?" Ashley said quietly, though not quietly enough. "We may have an unauthorized passenger occupying a first-class seat." A faint murmur drifted through the cabin. Someone lowered a phone after secretly recording. Another passenger looked away, uncomfortable with becoming part of a moment that felt increasingly wrong. Evelyn slowly rose from her seat before anyone touched her. She smoothed the wrinkles from her cardigan with quiet dignity, lifted her worn handbag onto one shoulder, and looked at Ashley with an expression that held neither resentment nor fear. Only sadness. "Young lady," she said almost gently, "I hope, for your own sake, that someone checks more than appearances before this flight leaves the ground." The automatic doors slid shut behind Evelyn Brooks with a gentle hiss, sealing away the murmurs that still lingered inside the aircraft. She didn't resist when the gate agent quietly guided her toward the waiting area. She simply walked with the measured pace of someone who had long ago learned that dignity could never be taken unless it was surrendered. The terminal buzzed with ordinary life. Families hurried toward connecting flights while business travelers stared into glowing laptop screens. No one noticed the elderly black woman sitting alone beside the wide glass windows overlooking the runway. To them, she was invisible. To Evelyn, invisibility had been an old companion. Long before her son became one of the youngest airline executives in American history, she had spent decades cleaning classrooms after midnight, folding laundry for wealthy families, and serving meals in diners where customers often forgot to look her in the eye. There were winters when she skipped dinner so her son could eat another bowl of soup, and nights when exhaustion pulled at every muscle in her body. Yet she still opened another secondhand economics book borrowed from the public library, because little Marcus always asked questions she couldn't answer. Mom, why do airplanes stay in the sky? Mom, who decides where they fly? She never wanted to reply with, I don't know. So she studied beside him, learning enough to keep his curiosity alive. Years passed. Marcus earned scholarships, left behind the tiny apartment where rain leaked through the ceiling every spring, and eventually rose from graduate school to corporate boardrooms and a corner office overlooking thousands of aircraft carrying millions of strangers every year. Reporters called him a visionary. Investors praised his leadership. Whenever anyone asked where his strength came from, Marcus always gave the same answer. Everything I built started with my mother. Yet Evelyn never changed. She still clipped grocery coupons, volunteered at her neighborhood church, and wore shoes until they could no longer be repaired. When Marcus offered her a mansion overlooking the ocean, she thanked him and stayed in the small brick house filled with memories. When he arranged private jets for family vacations, she quietly canceled them and booked ordinary commercial flights instead. If your airline is good enough for everyone else, she often told him with a warm smile, it's good enough for me. Marcus laughed every time because he knew there was no arguing with his mother once she believed something was right. That was why today's trip carried no special announcement, no executive escort, no security detail. Even the reservation had been made under her own name without any request for VIP treatment. Marcus never imagined anyone would question a paid first-class ticket simply because of the woman holding it. Evelyn folded her boarding pass carefully and slipped it back inside her handbag. Through the towering glass, she watched the same aircraft where she had been humiliated remain motionless at the gate, its engines still silent beneath the fading golden light. She sighed softly, not because of the insult she had endured, but because somewhere inside that airplane, a young woman had mistaken appearance for worth. Evelyn knew that kind of mistake rarely began with cruelty alone. More often, it began with fear, assumptions, and a lifetime of learning to judge before understanding. She closed her eyes for a brief moment and whispered the same quiet prayer she had spoken for Marcus before every important journey since he was a little boy. Only this time, without realizing it, that prayer included Ashley Collins as well. Ashley Collins had spent 7 years convincing herself that success belonged to people who never hesitated. Every promotion, every commendation, and every polished smile had been earned through relentless discipline. She memorized passenger manifests before boarding began and knew the preferences of frequent flyers, influential politicians, and billionaires who expected sparkling water before takeoff. Her supervisors admired her efficiency. Ashley never let standards slip, they often said. Those words became the foundation of her identity. But somewhere between excellence and ambition, another habit quietly took root. She had begun confusing appearance with credibility. Expensive watches suggested importance. Tailored suits implied respectability. Designer luggage meant unquestioned access. It wasn't written in any training manual. No instructor had ever taught it. It was simply something she absorbed after years of watching powerful people receive different treatment. This morning had started before dawn. Ashley adjusted the gold wings pinned above her heart while rehearsing the conversation she hoped to have later with Regional Service Director Linda Carter. A management position had finally opened. Competition was fierce. One complaint from a premium passenger could erase years of perfect evaluations. One operational delay could place another candidate ahead of her. Today mattered. As boarding continued inside Gate 18, Ashley glanced repeatedly at her smartwatch. Departure windows were shrinking. The captain had already requested confirmation that every premium passenger had boarded. She moved through the cabin with crisp precision, greeting executives by name, helping a retired senator settle into Seat 1C, and smiling naturally at a famous sports commentator. Then she reached Seat 2A. A modestly dressed elderly black woman sat quietly where Fortune 500 CEOs usually sat. It felt wrong to Ashley before she even looked at the boarding pass. By the time she glanced at it, her judgment had already been made. Confirmation bias did the rest. Nearby, 2 junior flight attendants exchanged uncertain looks after Evelyn left the aircraft. Ashley, one of them whispered. What if her ticket was actually valid? Ashley barely looked up from her tablet. The system occasionally misprints boarding zones, she replied confidently. I'd rather inconvenience one passenger than have someone sitting in the wrong cabin. Neither attendant argued further. Ashley carried authority naturally, and even senior crew members often deferred to her decisions. Still, the uneasiness remained. One flight attendant quietly reopened the digital seating chart. Seat 2A remained highlighted in green. Verified. Paid. Confirmed. She frowned. Before she could mention it, a notification flashed briefly across the screen before disappearing. VIP security protocol pending verification. She blinked, thinking she had imagined it. Ashley never saw the alert. She was already thanking passengers for their patience with practiced warmth, though tension tightened every muscle in her shoulders. The aircraft doors remained open longer than scheduled. Outside, baggage loaders stopped moving. Fuel trucks waited instead of disconnecting. A ground operations supervisor received a phone call, glanced toward the aircraft, then abruptly changed direction. Another airport vehicle accelerated across the tarmac without activating its usual flashing lights. Ashley noticed the unusual activity only for a moment before dismissing it. Airports were full of unexpected movements. She straightened a folded blanket on an empty first-class seat and silently reassured herself she had protected the airline standards. What she could not see was that inside the airline's headquarters 20 miles away, an executive assistant had just walked hurriedly into the top-floor boardroom, carrying a tablet with an expression no one in that room had ever seen before. The call reached the executive boardroom at exactly 5:42 p.m. Marcus Brooks had been presenting the airline's quarterly expansion strategy when his executive assistant quietly entered without knocking, something she had never done in 4 years. Every conversation around the polished walnut table stopped. Without a word, she handed him a tablet. Marcus glanced down, expecting another scheduling adjustment. Instead, he saw a single internal priority alert highlighted in red. VIP passenger verification failure, Gate 18. First class removal under review. Beneath it appeared one name, Evelyn Brooks. The color drained from his face. Around the table, directors exchanged puzzled glances as Marcus read the report again, slower this time, almost hoping the words would somehow change. Removed from first class, pending identity verification. Passenger escorted from aircraft. Security notified. For a heartbeat, the room fell silent. Marcus slowly stood, his chair scraping sharply across the hardwood floor. Cancel the rest of this meeting, he said quietly. No one moved. They had never heard him speak in that tone before. Now, within seconds, executives gathered their laptops while Marcus reached for his phone. His first call went directly to airport operations. No answer. His second reached the vice president of customer experience. Tell me exactly what happened at Gate 18, he demanded. The executive hesitated. Sir, we're still collecting information. My mother is sitting in that terminal, Marcus replied. I want every verified fact before that aircraft moves 1 inch. Across the airport, none of the passengers inside the first-class cabin knew what had begun. Ashley Collins finished checking overhead compartments, still believing the delay would soon be resolved. She thanked a businessman for his patience, smiled reassuringly at a family across the aisle, and closed another storage bin with practiced precision. Yet the ordinary rhythm of departure had quietly fallen apart. The jet bridge remained attached. Refueling crews stepped away from the aircraft while supervisors gathered near the gate entrance, speaking in hushed voices and repeatedly glancing toward the terminal windows. Inside the waiting area, Evelyn remained seated exactly where the gate agent had left her. She watched aircraft taxi beneath the orange glow of the setting sun, her hands folded gently over her worn handbag. She could have ended everything with a single phone call. Marcus would have answered immediately, no matter how busy he was. Instead, she remained silent. She had always believed character revealed itself most clearly when no powerful name stood behind it. Nearby, a little girl walked over holding a stuffed rabbit almost as large as her arms. Excuse me, she whispered shyly. Are you okay? Evelyn smiled, the sadness in her eyes softening. I will be, sweetheart. The little girl nodded and offered a wrapped peppermint before running back to her parents. Evelyn accepted it with quiet gratitude. Small kindnesses, she often believed, carried more weight than grand speeches. Moments later, airport loudspeakers announced that Flight 287 would remain at the gate due to an operational review. Confused murmurs spread through the terminal. Ashley frowned. Operational reviews were unusual after boarding had already finished. Before she could ask anyone for clarification, her tablet vibrated with a message unlike any she had ever received. Remain on board. Do not authorize departure. Senior executive team en route. She stared at the screen, convinced there had been some mistake. Then two black executive SUVs raced across the restricted service road toward Gate 18. Every instinct told Ashley something enormous was unfolding. She still believed it had nothing to do with the elderly black woman she had asked to leave only minutes earlier. Gate 18 no longer sounded like an ordinary departure lounge. The steady rhythm of rolling suitcases and casual conversations had dissolved into scattered whispers and nervous glances. Something was happening, and everyone could feel it, even if no one understood why. Inside the aircraft, Captain Daniel Foster remained seated in the cockpit, staring at a message glowing across the flight management display. Departure authorization suspended by executive operations. Await further instruction. In 23 years of commercial flying, he had never seen those words appear after passengers had already boarded. He reached for the intercom, but stopped. There was nothing useful he could tell the passengers. Flight attendants exchanged increasingly uneasy looks. Ashley Collins maintained her professional posture as she walked through the first-class aisle, checking seat belts that had already been checked twice, straightening magazines no one was reading, and adjusting blankets that did not need adjusting. She refused to let uncertainty show on her face. Confidence, she believed, reassured passengers. Yet her thoughts refused to settle. Why would executives be coming to the gate? Had there been a security breach? A mechanical issue? A celebrity requiring discreet transportation? None of the possibilities made sense. Then Linda Carter boarded the aircraft. The regional director almost never visited gates during active departures. Her expression alone caused the nearest flight attendant to straighten instinctively. Linda looked neither angry nor rushed. She looked focused, which somehow felt even more unsettling. Ashley, she said quietly, step into the galley for a moment. Ashley followed without hesitation. Can you explain exactly why passenger Evelyn Brooks was removed from seat 2A? Linda asked. Ashley answered confidently, almost rehearsed. Her appearance didn't match the cabin profile. I believe there had been a boarding error and acted before departure to avoid operational delays. Linda remained silent. Did you verify the ticket? Ashley nodded. Briefly. Did you scan it? Ashley hesitated. No. Did you call reservations? No. Did you ask the gate supervisor to verify her identity? Ashley felt an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. No. Linda lowered her eyes briefly before speaking again. So your decision was based primarily on your personal judgment. Ashley opened her mouth to defend herself, but found no words. For the first time that day, the certainty she had worn like armor began to fracture. Outside the aircraft, two black executive SUVs rolled quietly to a stop beneath the terminal windows. Airport employees instinctively stepped aside. Even passengers inside the cabin noticed the movement beyond the windows. Heads turned. Phones discreetly rose above armrests. Across the terminal, Evelyn remained seated exactly where she had been for nearly 30 minutes. The peppermint given to her by the little girl remained unopened in her hand. She watched the executive vehicles arrive without changing her expression. A young gate agent approached cautiously. Mrs. Brooks, would you like to wait in the VIP lounge? Evelyn smiled politely. Thank you, dear. I'm comfortable right here. The young employee nodded, almost embarrassed by the kindness she received in return. Back inside the aircraft, Ashley's tablet vibrated again. This time the message contained only 4 words. CEO arriving in 3 minutes. She stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Her heartbeat suddenly sounded louder than the engines outside. She tried to remember every executive photograph displayed during annual company training. Then a single face emerged from memory. Marcus Brooks, the airline CEO. The man whose speeches always ended with stories about the sacrifices his mother had made to give him a future. Ashley felt a chill crawl slowly down her spine as one impossible thought entered her mind. A thought she immediately tried to reject before it could fully take shape. The airport seemed to inhale and hold its breath. Outside the enormous glass walls of Terminal B, The last light of evening stretched across the runway, bathing every aircraft in soft amber. Flight 287 remained motionless, its navigation lights blinking against the growing dusk. Inside the terminal, the restless energy that had filled the gate only minutes earlier faded into uneasy silence. Even the children who had been laughing now clung quietly to their parents, sensing that something unusual was unfolding. Evelyn Brooks remained seated beneath the wide window, her weathered hands folded gently over the old handbag that had accompanied her through decades of ordinary life. She looked neither defeated nor impatient. The humiliation she had endured moments before had not hardened her expression. Instead, there was only a quiet sadness, the kind that belonged to someone who had seen too many versions of the same wound to be surprised by another. She slowly unwrapped the peppermint the little girl had given her earlier. Such a small gesture, she thought. Yet kindness had always arrived in small packages. A stranger holding open a door. A teacher encouraging a frightened child. A neighbor leaving soup on a porch during difficult winters. Those moments had carried her farther through life than money ever could. Her thoughts drifted back more than 40 years to another terminal, another journey, another afternoon when a young Marcus, barely 10 years old, had looked up at her after watching someone refuse to sit beside them because they were black. "Why do people do that, Mom?" he had asked with tears burning in his eyes. Evelyn had squeezed his tiny hand and answered with words he never forgot. "Because some people learn to recognize skin before they recognize hearts. Promise me you'll never become one of them." Marcus had nodded through his tears. "I promise." That promise had shaped every decision of his life. Across the terminal, Ashley Collins stood just inside the aircraft doorway, staring through the jet bridge windows toward the waiting area. From that distance, she could barely make out Evelyn's figure sitting alone beneath the evening light. She expected anger. She expected outrage. Instead, she saw an elderly woman quietly watching airplanes take off, as though the world had not just humiliated her. The absence of anger unsettled Ashley more than any confrontation could have. It forced her to look inward as she replayed every second of their encounter. The calm voice asking her to check the boarding pass again. The gentle eyes that never reflected hatred. The final sentence. "I hope someone checks more than appearances before this flight leaves the ground." At the time, Ashley had dismissed it as quiet defiance. Now the words echoed differently, stripping away another layer of certainty each time. She suddenly realized she could not remember asking Evelyn a single question before ordering her removal. She had never asked where she was traveling, never verified the reservation, never wondered whether the elderly woman sitting alone deserved the same patience she automatically extended to wealthy executives in tailored suits. She had judged before she had understood. The realization settled over her with unbearable weight. Beyond the terminal entrance, the headlights of the approaching executive convoy reflected across the polished floor. Conversation stopped. Every airport employee instinctively turned toward the doors. Evelyn quietly lifted her eyes toward the entrance, then lowered them again with the same peaceful composure. She already knew her son was coming. What she did not know was whether this evening would end with punishment or with something far more difficult, forgiveness. If this moment touched your heart, remember that the greatest measure of character is how we treat people before we know who they are. The glass entrance doors swept open, and the entire terminal seemed to freeze. Conversations died in mid-sentence. Rolling suitcases stopped. Even the airport announcements faded beneath the sudden weight of silence. Marcus Brooks strode through the terminal surrounded by senior executives, airport directors, and security personnel, yet he barely noticed any of them. His eyes searched only for one person. The moment he saw Evelyn sitting quietly beside the window, every trace of the composed executive disappeared. His pace quickened, his polished shoes echoing across the marble floor with the urgency of a frightened son. Employees instinctively stepped aside, creating a path no one had been asked to make. From the aircraft doorway, Ashley watched in disbelief. She recognized Marcus immediately from annual leadership conferences and company broadcasts. She had expected him to stop with the operations managers waiting nervously near the gate. Instead, he walked past every executive without acknowledging a single greeting. His entire world narrowed to the elderly black woman sitting alone beneath the fading light. Evelyn slowly looked up as her son approached. Before she could rise, Marcus dropped to one knee in front of her. His eyes glistened. "Mom," he whispered, the word barely escaping his lips. He wrapped both arms around her, as though trying to erase every painful second she had spent alone. Evelyn gently rested one hand against the back of his head, exactly as she had done when he was a frightened little boy waking from nightmares. "I'm all right," she whispered. "You came." Marcus pulled back just enough to search her face. "Did anyone hurt you?" She offered the same calm smile that had carried him through every hardship of his childhood. "Only my feelings for a little while." Those simple words struck him harder than any accusation ever could. Around them, employees lowered their eyes. Some passengers quietly wiped away tears as the truth spread through the terminal. The elderly black woman removed from first class was not an unauthorized passenger. She was the mother of the airline CEO. Ashley felt every ounce of confidence drain from her body. Her legs suddenly seemed unable to support her weight. Memories replayed with brutal clarity. The unfinished sentence, the assumptions, the refusal to verify the boarding pass, the calm request to check again. Every decision she had defended now stood exposed beneath the harsh light of undeniable truth. Linda Carter quietly stepped beside her without speaking. There was nothing left to explain. Marcus slowly stood and turned toward the gathered executives. His expression remained controlled, but disappointment settled heavily across his face. "Who removed my mother from this aircraft?" he asked. No one answered immediately. The silence stretched painfully. Ashley knew she could remain hidden among the crew for a few more seconds. She could let someone else speak first. Instead, with trembling hands and a heartbeat thundering inside her chest, she stepped forward. "It was me, sir." Marcus looked directly at her. There was no shouting, no public humiliation. Somehow, that made the moment even harder to endure. "Did my mother threaten anyone?" he asked quietly. Ashley lowered her eyes. "No, sir." "Did she refuse instructions?" "No." "Did you verify her reservation before removing her?" Tears blurred Ashley's vision. "No, sir." Marcus inhaled slowly, disappointment visible in every line of his face. Then he looked toward Evelyn, who remained standing peacefully beneath the warm evening light, her expression untouched by anger. She gave him the smallest, almost invisible shake of her head. It was not a command. It was a mother's reminder that true strength was measured not by the power to punish, but by the courage to choose mercy when punishment would have been easy. If this moment touched your heart, remember that dignity does not come from titles or wealth. It is revealed by how we treat those who seem to have neither. No one spoke for several long seconds. The silence that settled across Gate 18 felt heavier than any argument ever could. Ashley Collins stood with her hands trembling at her sides, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Every achievement she had collected over 7 years suddenly felt meaningless. Promotions, awards, glowing performance reviews. None of them could erase the simple truth that she had judged one human being before learning her name. Marcus Brooks slowly turned back toward his mother. "Tell me what you want me to do," he said quietly. It was an extraordinary question. The chief executive of one of the nation's largest airlines was not asking his legal team or his board of directors. He was asking the woman who had taught him the meaning of justice long before he ever understood business. Evelyn remained silent for a moment, watching the evening light shimmer across the aircraft waiting beyond the terminal windows. Then she looked at Ashley. The young flight attendant no longer resembled the confident employee who had stood proudly in the first-class aisle less than an hour earlier. Her shoulders had collapsed beneath the weight of regret. Tears slipped silently down her face. She stepped forward, her voice breaking before the first word fully emerged. "Mrs. Brooks, I'm so sorry." She swallowed hard, struggling to continue. "I judged you before I knew you. I never even gave you the chance to be heard. I don't expect forgiveness, and I understand if I lose everything because of what I did today. But I'm ashamed of the person I was." Evelyn studied her quietly. Years of experience had taught her to recognize the difference between fear and genuine remorse. Fear focused on consequences. Remorse focused on the pain caused to someone else. Looking into Ashley's eyes now, Evelyn saw neither excuses nor resentment. She saw a young woman confronting herself for the very first time. Slowly, Evelyn stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. She gently took Ashley's trembling hands into her own. The unexpected kindness caused Ashley to lower her head even further. Look at me, child, Evelyn said softly. Ashley hesitated before lifting tear-filled eyes. You made a painful mistake, Evelyn continued. But if today only cost you your job, then you've learned very little. If today changes the way you see every person for the rest of your life, then something good can still grow from something painful. Ashley could no longer hold back her tears. They fell freely now, not from fear of losing her career, but from hearing compassion where she had expected condemnation. Marcus watched quietly, remembering countless moments from childhood when his mother had answered cruelty with grace instead of bitterness. He finally understood that the greatest lesson she had ever given him was unfolding once again, not for him this time, but for everyone watching. He turned toward the senior executives gathered nearby. Ashley Collins will not be terminated today, he announced. A ripple of surprise spread through the crowd. Instead, beginning next week, she will work directly with our customer experience and inclusion program. She will complete every stage of our empathy and service initiative, and when she returns to flying, she will help teach future employees that respect begins long before verification screens or boarding passes. Ashley stared at him in disbelief. It was not an escape from accountability. It was something far more demanding. She would have to become the person she should have been before this day ever began. She looked once more at Evelyn. Thank you, she whispered through tears. Evelyn smiled warmly. Don't thank me, she replied. Honor this moment by making sure no one else ever sits where I sat today. Around them, employees quietly wiped their eyes. Some passengers applauded softly before others gradually joined in, celebrating not power or status, but the rare sight of mercy walking hand in hand with justice. If this moment touched your heart, share it with someone who believes kindness is weakness, because sometimes forgiveness changes more lives than punishment ever could. 6 months later, the memory of that evening still lived quietly within the walls of the airline, not as a scandal whispered through hallways, but as a lesson repeated in every new employee orientation. The security footage from Gate 18 was never released to the public. Marcus Brooks refused every request from news organizations that wanted to turn his mother's humiliation into headlines. If people remember this story, he told his leadership team, let them remember what changed afterward, not what went wrong. True to his word, the company invested in something far more meaningful than public relations. Customer service training was rewritten from the ground up. Every employee, from executives to gate agents, attended workshops built around one simple principle. Every passenger deserves dignity before verification. At the center of those sessions stood Ashley Collins. The first time she entered the classroom, she did so without the polished confidence that had once defined her. She spoke honestly about the worst decision of her career. She admitted how easily assumptions had replaced curiosity and how quickly prejudice could disguise itself as professionalism. New employees listened in complete silence. Many expected a lecture about company policy. Instead, they heard a confession about humanity. Ashley never tried to excuse herself. She simply described the elderly black woman who had answered humiliation with grace and how that act of mercy had transformed her life more completely than punishment ever could have. Outside the classroom, her actions changed as much as her words. She no longer hurried past passengers who looked ordinary. She knelt beside elderly travelers to help fasten seat belts, patiently explained boarding procedures to nervous first-time flyers, and remembered returning passengers because of their stories rather than their status. Colleagues noticed the difference long before management did. One rainy afternoon, nearly half a year after the incident, Flight 287 prepared for departure once again. Ashley stood at the aircraft door greeting passengers with the same elegant uniform, but a very different heart. An elderly black woman approached slowly using a worn wooden cane. Her coat was old. Her suitcase carried faded travel stickers from decades past. Some passengers glanced impatiently as she struggled with the overhead compartment. Without hesitation, Ashley stepped forward. Please, she said warmly, taking the suitcase with both hands. Welcome aboard. Your seat is ready, and I'm honored to help you. The woman's surprised smile lingered long after she had settled into her seat. At the rear of the boarding line, another passenger quietly watched the moment unfold. Evelyn Brooks stood unnoticed beneath a simple beige coat, carrying the same old leather handbag she had carried 6 months earlier. She had booked another ordinary ticket without informing Marcus. This time, no one questioned her presence or measured her worth by her clothes. Ashley never recognized Evelyn during boarding. She treated every passenger that afternoon with the same patience she had once reserved only for those who appeared important. As boarding finished, Ashley walked slowly through the cabin one final time. When she reached Evelyn's row, she paused. Their eyes met. Recognition came instantly. Ashley's breath caught, but before she could speak, Evelyn offered nothing more than a gentle smile and the slightest nod of approval. No words were necessary. Some forgiveness was too deep to be spoken aloud. Ashley smiled back through glistening eyes and continued down the aisle, greeting the next passenger with the very same kindness. Outside, the aircraft engines awakened with a low, steady roar. As the airplane lifted gently into the clouds, Evelyn looked out the window and closed her eyes, feeling the familiar warmth of peace settle over her heart. Justice had not arrived through revenge. It had arrived through a changed heart. And in the quiet hum above the clouds, there was nothing left to hear except the beautiful silence of compassion finally taking flight.